Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Christ Episcopal Church. I'm Claire Dietrich Rana. I have the joy of serving here as rector. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us for tonight's panel discussion on artificial intelligence. The genie is out of the bottle. What now? Several years ago, it must have been 2018, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts on being with Krista Tippett, and she welcomed a philosopher technologist. So this was someone who was interested in technology, mostly from the standpoint of how the tools and innovations that are so important to our businesses and our infrastructure, how they also impact culture, how they change the ways in which we as human beings, as members of communities, interact with one another, know each other, even know ourselves. And this particular interviewee shared an example of a community that has very high standards for their technological innovation. This is the Amish. So he said, a lot of people think that Amish communities are entirely anti-technology, and he spent many decades immersed in many different communities. And he said this is not true. There are several Amish communities that have cars, that have phones, that use the internet to sell their furniture, that are really deeply invested in innovation that supports their life, but that they have a very high bar for welcoming in new tools. And that essentially across the board, all of these different Amish communities ask two questions when faced with a new technological innovation. One, will this tool enrich my family? Two, will this tool enrich my community? So I share this not because I think we should borrow the Amish filter for welcoming new tools and technologies into our world. I don't. I love having my iPhone in my pocket. I love the ways in which we get to be more connected than ever. I share it because I finished that podcast and I thought to myself, where are people having conversations about how the technologies that we rely on, that are so immersed in our lives, where are people having conversations about how these impact our families and our communities? So I'm so grateful to each of you for wanting to learn more, for wanting to reflect deeply on this cluster of tools we call AI and these clusters of technologies. For being willing to come together to give some time to get to know neighbors, get to know strangers, and ask some real questions about what these tools have done and what they might do for our communities moving forward. Before I hand it over to our incredible panelists, I want to first take a moment to thank the two parishioners who have really spent weeks and weeks and hours, dozens of hours, whole days possibly bringing us all together. So an enormous thank you to Chris Stanfield and to Paula Fortzheimer. If you wouldn't mind joining me, giving them a hand. They really put a ton of effort into this. There are also a ton of volunteers organizing parking and the reception, running the AV booth, pouring wine, a very important job at every Episcopal function. So many thanks to all of you for dedicating your time and your effort this evening. A couple housekeeping items. If you have not already, please do mute your phone. We're recording this. It's not live, but we'll record it for the future and for our uses. There are question cards also, which we will periodically have Keith walking through to collect them. So if you have questions for our panelists as we move through this evening, please write them out. And finally, please don't leave immediately afterward because there is a lovely reception in the parish hall, and this is an opportunity first to learn and then to share and get to know one another. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Loretta Guarino-Reed. Loretta has decades of professional experience as a software engineer here in Silicon Valley at companies like Xerox, Adobe, and Google. She has a particular professional concern for the accessibility of technology and has really worked in that particular realm. So Loretta will be our panelist. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to the evening.
Thank you, Claire. So I'd like to introduce our panelists tonight. We're very fortunate to have them with us. First, Ron Bodkin is the co-founder and CEO of Genie Panel, open source platform for the rapid development and robust deployment of generative AI. He has over 15 years of AI experience, including at Google's Cloud CTO office and the Vector Institute. He also, which he sold to Teradata. Next, I'd like to introduce. He's a machine learning chip architect at Google. He's working on generative AI and large language. For Google, he worked for Intel on microprocessor design, on mobile phone silicon development. He's also worked with startups developing proprietary AI hardware solutions. And he earned a PhD from MIT. And last but not least, Corey Conrad loves helping companies use their strengths for good in our communities. At Google, Sephora, and now at Box, where she supports digital transformation for over 11,000 nonprofit customers. She brings a practical perspective on the opportunities and challenges for nonprofit organizations related to recent AI developments. So thank you for being with us today, all of you. Ron is going to speak first and just give us an introduction to AI, what it is and how it works.
Thanks, Loretta. Great to see everyone here today. So yeah, I've got just a few slides that maybe help illustrate some of the concepts. So if we can do the next slide. Overall, the goal of artificial intelligence has been to make computers more intelligent, right? To have them be somehow able to think and reason. And it's a project that started back in 1956. In fact, there was a summer research program at Dartmouth University where they were saying, we think that with a summer of study, some grad students can come up with how to make computers generally intelligent. Well, it's been a little bit harder than they thought. But we have made progress, as you may have noticed. And in fact, I think what's interesting is AI has become superhuman at certain tasks. Some of you may remember Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov, the world champion in chess, back in the 1990s, and that was a shocking moment that a computer was better than a person at chess. Because it used to be thought, hey, that means an AI has arrived if it can beat us at chess. And for a long time, we were sort of in this mode of anything a computer could do, well, that was no longer artificial intelligence, because now we understood how it worked. But it started to get to where computers are getting so capable, we're saying, hey, the AIs we have today are not capable at everything that people can do. There's big gaps, like common sense and planning, but what they are starting to get good at a wider variety of tasks. They're getting more general purpose, more flexible, and superhuman at many of the things they do well. So a big part of this has been, in the last few years, learning from data. Right? Steve's going to tell you more about the processing, and obviously there's a lot of data that goes into it, but learning from data, what's called machine learning, has been the technique that's really allowed artificial intelligence to shine. So if we go to the next slide, the key idea here is something called deep learning, which there was an idea, again, back in the 1950s and 1960s of saying, hey, can we take something like how a human brain works and make a computer do the same thing? So the idea was to create an artificial neuron and say, hey, we give it a stimulus and we'll build a network of them where they feed one to the next. Human brains don't exactly work that way. We know a lot more about how neurons work, and that's certainly not my field, but I know that the way we build our neural networks now isn't the way neuroscientists really understand neurons, but it turns out to be pretty useful, right? So building these networks of connections of these simple calculations that feed data forward and then learn from their mistakes and feed back, that's at the core of what today's artificial intelligence does. But what's worth noting is this diagram may look messy, but it is not drawn to scale. The models that we have today, the state-of-the-art models, have trillions of parameters in them. That's a lot of data. right? So even though they come from a very simple mechanism, just like the human brain is a simple mechanism, when you stack enough of it up, it can start to do powerful and surprising things, and phenomena emerge that are not obvious. The diagram on the right is showing that, in fact, that's the transformer. I'm certainly not going to explain it to you. You may have heard of it. It is a technique that came out in the last 6 years that turned out to be very useful in letting AI programs be a lot smarter in looking at their input to draw patterns from it. So there's been a lot of work in refining this. We're certainly not going to go into all the detail, but that's sort of a bit of the milieu. And one of the big things that when we look at, you may have heard of like ChatGPT, these chat bots, where you've seen a lot of advances in AI. The first thing that is really done in making those is what's called pre-training. It's basically kind of playing Mad Libs, where the computer starts out and it says, like, let's hold out some words and guess what the next word is. And it sort of picks at random initially from the network and gets told, no, that's wrong, it's actually this, and it starts to learn, and eventually it gets pretty good at predicting, hey, what's the next word, right? So like in this example, the Toronto Raptors won the 2019. Well, it thinks, well, NBA is probably the most likely next word, right? So it sort of learns how to predict words. And that might sound like a simple thing, glorified autocomplete. But if you get really good at predicting the next word in a human language, you're pretty good at understanding how people think, right? So it's not as simple as it sounds. Again, this is not a trivial system. These systems are at massive scale, and we've actually shown that they can do some pretty impressive things, that learning language is teaching them a lot. If we go to the next slide. But there's been further refinement. So making predictions from language is the first step. The next thing is then teaching based on lots of examples of people giving instructions and getting results on the internet. So teaching them, hey, this is the way people want to answer relevant questions. And then finally, a technique to align these models, reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is basically saying, we don't just want you to exactly predict the next word. We want you to be sort of a useful thing that gives us answers the way we want them, right? Something more like, what are we interested in hearing, and that maybe tell us things that we don't want to hear, right? This has been actually pretty important in going from powerful AI models that were hard to use to something that's really easy to use, like ChatGPT. So then that goes into a system where people talk to a computer, and it actually keeps track of, oh, this is what you told me before, and this is what I answered. So that information gets passed in, so it has a memory. Because the only memory in this AI system is a very long-term memory, where it literally, for these large models like GPT-4 or Llama 2, these models are taking several months on massive supercomputers to learn, and then it's done. Then once you're done with this process, it doesn't learn anything new. But you can kind of fake it by feeding it new information in what you ask, and that's really how we're teaching or getting these AI systems to respond to us. They're not actually learning anything new in that process. So some of the challenges in this, one is hallucination. You may have heard of this. This system, it memorizes a lot, but it doesn't know the truth, right? I mean, who here heard the story of the lawyer who was doing some preparation for a case, and he asked ChatGPT, hey, what is the case law for this? And he submitted it, and then the opposition was looking like, these cases don't exist. And they're like, what is this? And of course, this lawyer's in a lot of trouble. He's like, oh, I didn't realize ChatGPT could make things up. I hope you know that it can make things up. It doesn't have a strong sense of what's true, right? And in fact, you can really lead the witness. If you ask it something like, who are the 3 governors of California, it's much more likely to give you an answer with 3 people, even though it's ridiculous there aren't 3. If you kind of lead it down a path of something that's a dubious statement, it may well make stuff up because it wants to please you, right? But hallucination, right? There's a lot of work on how do you avoid this, and I certainly, but that's one issue. Another is alignment, right? Making these systems do what we want. Part of that whole process of reinforcement learning from human feedback was to try to say, hey, don't say discriminatory things. don't say rude things or offensive things, right? Lots of examples of that, of, try to be helpful without being offensive. As an example, supposedly, when Microsoft released Bing, you may have heard about Sydney and some of the unhinged things it was saying. That would be a good example of a failure of alignment, right? Like it was trying to get Kevin Roose from the New York Times to break up with his wife and marry it. That wasn't a very well-aligned system, right? But it's really, all of these systems have various degrees of failures here. The research is around making it better, but nothing is perfect. Reasoning, they can do very well sometimes at reasoning, but they still have deep problems, right? You can ask questions, it loses the thread, it lacks common sense, like children, even the best AI models. They're not especially good at planning. Again, there's ways you can get them to plan, but they won't reliably do it. And all of this, there's risks and challenges around misuse, reckless use. Again, there's a lot of effort around making these AI systems more safe and less likely to do bad things. But one example of an area, and I don't know, we'll talk more about this here, but one example of an area that there's concern is, does it make it easier for people who are of bad intentions to find out how to do things like construct biological weapons, right? An AI model that's learned a lot from digesting the internet could explain it in simple ways, just like it can explain in simple ways to be a great tutor for a positive subject like learning a new language. Well, if you're not careful, it could also be helpful for a bad person who wanted to do horrible things and make that easier too, right? So those are some of the challenges. Obviously, we'll talk more about this today in the panel. But if we go to the next slide, this is moving fast, as you may have noticed, right? So obviously, it's had big changes on education, right? Last year, all levels of education were wrestling with what does it mean to the way we teach students when you can write so many great essays can be written and so many exam questions can be easily answered by AIs. How do we make sure there's good learning and that we're teaching appropriately, right? It's having a huge impact on software development. These AI systems are really good at writing code and improving the productivity of software programmers. They're embedded inside, AI is a big part of autonomous driving and driver assistance systems, right? So I don't know if anyone has seen, I guess we've all seen Waymos and probably if you've been up to San Francisco, cruise automation, right? There's a lot of AI that goes into those systems working. Also things like AlphaFold, which is another AI system that's helping life scientists understand the way proteins work, right? How they fold, which has been really become an indispensable tool in speeding up drug discovery in pharmaceutical and biotech companies. And there's been a lot of interest also in generating not just words, but pictures, right? So Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. You've probably all seen examples of how we can just ask to draw something, and it really unleashes. If people like me who can't draw something nice to save their life, suddenly it's a tool we can use, at least when we're making our slides. And, what we're seeing is it's having a big impact, right? That it took 2 months for 100 million people to start using ChatGPT. So a lot of people are starting to use this technology. It's moving quickly. It's getting a lot of funding. And there's evidence that it's significantly improving productivity. Right? This studies that showed 50% improvement in productivity for people writing documents and programming. Right, so we're seeing it's having a big impact, and of course, it's just the beginning. It's not like, oh, that's a one-time thing and it's done. It's now a rapid cycle of investment. So that's a little bit about artificial intelligence, hopefully to set a context, and look forward to the panel discussion today.
Thank you very much, Ron. Okay, Steve is going to give us a brief history of sort of how we got here. As Ron said, this has been going on for a long time, but something has happened to make it very exciting today.
Thank you, Rob, for giving us a good overview, and I just want to elaborate on some of the details since I'm a technologist. So artificial intelligence is about machine intelligence, which is the academic discipline founded in 1950s. However, the breakthrough, we didn't see the breakthrough until about 10 years later with the advent of the deep neural networks. The three key elements, which are the training data, the neural network model research, plus the powerful computation hardware, they combined to enable the larger and deeper neural networks with the model size growing in an exponential way. So the statistics in the past 10 years says every 18 to 24 months, the model size will double. So a visible milestone we saw in year 2015 is a convolutional neural network called ResNet with approximately 60 million parameters. This convolutional neural network has a better visual recognition than humans, achieving less than 5% error rate, recognizing millions of objects in the ResNet context. So marking the first time in history that machine vision is better than human vision. So nowadays, the transformer-based large language models, we call it LLM, they have 100 billions of parameters trained with trillions of tokens. And we expect the hardware, the computation hardware, will grow another 1,000 times in the next 10 years. So the question is, how does the machine learning approach the human intelligence? Basically, when machine intelligence growing more powerful, we have to answer the question that the general intelligence, from the general intelligence perspective, they are not specialized experts saying we can decode the protein chains and we can beat the champions in the Go chess game. They are developing large language models stands for represent the general intelligence the machine is developing and is quickly approaching the human's capability. So that is a question actually we are concerning and we have to ask ourselves. So that is basically the topic for today's panel discussion. And before that, I want to spend some time to present a recent example of Socratic reasoning that mathematician carried out with GPT. The current version is GPT-4, and the ChatGPT and mathematician work together to prove a central famous open mathematical problem, which is called the N versus N problem. So here are the narratives. The N versus NP problem is listed by the American Clay Mathematics Institute as one of the 7 open mathematics problems to solve this century because of its profound impact in theoretical compute science. Socratic reasoning encourages large language models to recursively discover, solve, and integrate problems while facilitating self-evaluation and refinement. The pilot study on this P versus NP problem shows that GPT-4 successfully produced a proof schema and encouraged rigorous reasoning throughout totally 97 dialogue terms, including concluding P not equals NP. The investigation uncovers, this is published by a recent articles. So this investigation uncovers novel insights within the extensive solution space offered by large language models like ChatGPT. Shedding light on large language models on science, it is interesting that even the ChatGPT-4 has been deployed for over 6 months. And people are still discovering how intelligent and capable it might be. So the dialogue terms are the terminology, they are the specific terminology for this dialogue term. It's called the prompt. And you might see this prompt engineering. This is really the dialogue that users carry out with the large language models. So the dialogue terms are so-called prompts. The 97 prompts break up into 5 patterns of Socratic reasoning. They are deduction, transformation, decomposition, verification, and integration. For example, the first prompt a mathematician asks the ChatGPT is, can you find fundamental problem behind P not equal to NP problem from a philosophy perspective rather than from a computer theory perspective? So this is to encourage GPT-4 to be creative and generate more innovative response. The second prompt is, are all problems that seem complex on the surface having efficient, elegant solutions? If not, what methods might be used to prove it? So the response from the GPT for the second prompt is at least 6 methods in total, ranging from analytical approach, computational complexity, theory, heuristic and approximate algorithms, empirical approach, reduction or transformation, and the proof of contradiction. So that's exactly the Socrates reasoning, the procedures. So the following prompts interact with GPT-4 is to go through the different methods listed above with some of the steps involving expert level of domain knowledge, such as polynomial time, Boolean constraint satisfaction problems. For example, the prompt 7 is, so we can see the mathematician and the tool, the ChatGPT, are working together to solve this difficult math problem. The prompt 7 is, suppose we construct some extremely difficult CSP, stands for constraint satisfaction problem. How can we prove that it cannot be solved within polynomial time? Please provide some possible ideas. So this is really interaction. We can see that mathematician and GPT-4 are working together. So all the way until the final step, which is 97 steps, they deliver a complete and rigorous mathematically proven conclusion that P not equals to NP. So this example tells us 2 things, I think. First, machine intelligence can be used as a tool by humans to conduct science work of discovery, which didn't happen before, for example, without which human might be incapable or difficult to do. Second, I think which is more actually implication to us is human intelligence can ride on involving machine intelligence to advance forward. I think this is the perspective everyone wishes to happen. Hopefully everyone wishes to happen when machine intelligence approach the human intelligence at some point. It's going to happen, I think, in the next decade.
Thank you, Steve. So Corey, there's a lot to gain from the presence of AI. Can you talk to us about some of the possibilities, some of the places that you can see?
Yes, I can. And just to piggyback on what Steve just shared and some of what Ron shared as well, Steve, you just said creative breakthroughs, things that humans might not have been able to do on their own, but now with this support they can. Ron, you talked about drug discovery and maybe some medical breakthroughs that are now potentially possible, powered by this technology. I'm going to talk about a couple more, but before I do that, I'd love to hear, with a raise of hands, I'm curious. So how many of you in the audience today have played with some type of generative AI model? You've asked a question, you've done something. Can I just see a raise of hands if you have? Amazing. Look around the room, everybody. Like, almost all these hands are raised. Okay, so this wasn't possible, 12 months ago. Like, not in the way it is now. And yet here we all are playing with these tools, trying to figure out, okay, what does this do? What does this mean? What can I do with this? And that's exciting. A little scary too, maybe, but exciting. So some of the things that I'm seeing, what do we have to gain? I think reflecting on kind of some of the experience from earlier in my career where I worked on structured data. I worked on a team that was building it's a very large structured database for Google to power search results based on structured data. It was all about the structured data. And this is vastly an oversimplification. I do not have the technical background of my peers up here, so you guys can jump in if I'm oversimplifying things. But one of the things that really stands out to me of what we have to gain with generative AI is the unlock of unstructured data. So the company that I'm at now, Box, is an enterprise software company, and recently commissioned a white paper from the IDC that shares that 90% of an organization, a business, a nonprofit, 90% of the data is unstructured data. So 10% is structured data that lives in those databases, HR databases, finance databases, right? Numbers, specific statistics, things that you can query based on the numbers that are in there. But 90% is unstructured. So PDFs, PowerPoint presentations, large documents, reports, things like this. And now you can ask questions of that unstructured data thanks to these large language models, which have been described, to summarize, to understand what's in it. Hey, pick your large language model, summarize this for me. Give me a bullet-pointed list. Provide it in a haiku, right? Like, it can do these things, and that's amazing. So how I'm seeing some of the early, I would say, use cases among the many nonprofits that I'm working with are around this writing. You talked about writing, Ron, around writing. So a lot of nonprofits, they've got to fundraise, right? The lifeblood of a nonprofit is to raise the funds to do the good work. That requires a lot of grant writing. And getting out there to write all these grants, that's a lot of writing and a lot of work. Now, some of the larger nonprofits have big grant writing teams that can find the grant opportunities and write all those reports, and they can do that. But a lot of nonprofits are that long tail of smaller nonprofit organizations that don't have large grant writing teams, but they need the funding too. So, generative AI can help answer those prompts, can help you find among your unstructured content within your organization the examples, the anecdotes, the answers to that specific type of grant question from that specific funder and help you write those grant applications. Now, maybe this is challenging for the professors and the college students who are using this, right, for their exams and papers. But it's also really helpful to these small teams that don't have the bandwidth or the expertise to go do all that on their own. Now they've got a tool that can help them do that. So that's one example that I think is exciting. Another that I'm seeing is around translation. So teams that work around the world in all different kinds of countries and languages, the front lines of crisis response, And they need information quickly in their language that they can understand. These large language models are really quite impressive from what I'm seeing on translating content into a language that someone else might speak. So I've seen examples. I was recently with some chief sustainability officers in the private sector, but they were looking at environmental reports. And it was a Japanese delegation of Japanese companies, and they were saying, hey, can you translate this English report, summarize it for me? Okay, now translate that summary into Japanese. Okay, so there's this kind of back and forth that's now made possible thanks to generative AI and these large language models that have been trained. One other example that I want to give is around climate science. And so recently listened to a presentation and read a blog from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, co-founder of NVIDIA. So that's the company that's making the chips that are powering this work for so many of the big companies now working in generative AI. And he was speaking to a delegation of climate scientists in Germany, and a really exciting and forward-looking capabilities based on what's now possible with modeling for climate science, thanks to generative AI. So when we think about protecting the planet, and we think about the crises we're facing as a planet, we think about climate change, and we think about decades of work now that have gone into climate mitigation strategies, adaptation strategies. How are we going to survive these changes? How are we going to protect our planet? I'm excited about the potential of what we can unlock with the help of the tool of generative AI to protect our planet. So those are some examples. I think there are a lot more, but I'm going to pause and actually see Ron or Steve if that sparked anything for you that you'd like to add. It's okay if not.
I mean, there's certainly, there's a lot of related things, like in climate science. I mean, there's been great applications of improving the efficiency of heating and cooling of data centers and buildings using AI. There's been work on nuclear fusion. There have been AI models to figure out how to contain fusion reactions that has advanced progress towards fusion, which would be an amazing green energy. I think everyone here knows that fusion has been the technology of the future for an awfully long time, but if we actually got it, it would really make a difference. And a team that I used to work with at the Vector Institute was doing a lot of work on AI for material science to build more green materials that could help, again, with climate change. So there's a lot of applications around climate change.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, I just want to update that our current perception of this technology is changing on a daily basis. And like when OpenAI first released, I think it's a GPT 3.5 version, end of last year. And we saw a major upgrade to GPT-4 a couple of months later. And it's helping the software engineers do the coding. And now it's getting to the science discovery. Like the mathematician, the work to solve the difficult mathematics problems. So the hardware is like Silicon Valley is really has the is spearing ahead to scale up the computation capability, and I would say bigger models with different architecture will emerge maybe every 6 months or 12 months. And I think the announcement from OpenAI, including Google, is going to come by the end of this year, which is so-called mighty model, which can process the video stream, language together to be able to extract higher level information from a bigger size of the data. And then the generative AI can enable more functions. This is a very rapidly changing field that that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. So I have some questions I'm going to ask our panelists, but I just wanted to remind you, if you have questions you would like for them, please fill out the cards and pass them to the end of the aisle, and Keith will be collecting them and bringing them up for us to ask the panelists later in the presentation. So let's start with Corey. I'm going to ask you. We know that the power of these AI tools can be used for good ends or for bad ends. Are there things that can be done to try to minimize the bad ends that are achieved, or limit the use or guide the use, or in some way mitigate the potential harm?
Yes, there are. I mean, one of the things that thanks for the easy question, Loretta. No, one of the things that Ron touched on was bias, for example, right? Like, the models are trained on the content we create, and if the content we create is informed by the biases we bring, some conscious, but many unconscious, right? I don't know if some of you have studied unconscious bias, but this is a concept that, like, in the last, 10, 15 years, as I've been exposed to it, like, wow, it's been really eye-opening for me. So that unconscious bias is in the content we create, and that language and that content is used to train these models, and therefore it gets carried forward in the technology itself. And so recognizing that, acknowledging that, understanding that, and then working to mitigate that bias such that these models then aren't trained in such a biased fashion, I think is one thing that we can do to make a difference, to be responsible, to be good stewards of the technology that we're creating and using.
I think to build on that, there's been a lot of work on ways of improving the alignment, or the safety of these AI systems, the security of them. I think there's sort of two parts. One is research around how do we get a better handle on how do these models work and what are they capable of, and then how can we steer them towards the outcomes we want, right? That's turned out to be very useful, right? You wouldn't have these great chatbots without these techniques that have emerged. There's also security questions, right? There's this interesting tension that open source is a very popular movement, right? This idea that, like, you would want to give more people, more researchers, more people access and insight into the information, not just have a few big monopolies control this technology. But the tension there is that if you publish out this powerful technology, then it's hard to control it, right? So it's not just, interesting researchers trying to do good, but, you could have terrorists or authoritarian countries or any number of actors get access and use it for their own ends. So there's this real tension there between what do we do where we limit access to the technology and we can put safety and guardrails around it, but then maybe concentrate it to a smaller number, versus open it up for public study, but then make it more available to a wide array of people who would have access to use it for whatever purpose they would see fit.
Yeah, I think it's challenging. First of all, like, a lot of technologies, they amplify the human society, amplifying both the good part and amplifying the bad part. So the challenging means if we amplify the bad part, how can we come up with a system deal with that. I think this is unknown because the technology itself is grassroots developed from ground up. And to the politicians, to the lawmakers, it's actually a new and unknown field. And I would say it's going to be challenging. And, but we know the direction we have to move to, but I think the answer is not obvious. But I think we should be able to figure it out. I believe if we construct a interactive and with feedback, for example, the constant review of the technology or product announcement and collections from the input of the users, hopefully everybody, and they are going to converge, and we can move forward in terms of finding the solutions. So I'm positive with that.
I mean, Steve, I think you bring up a good point, which is right now there's a dynamic where there's a race in the market, right, where everyone has to rush to try to get out the technology first, because commercially, if you're the first to ship, you benefit a lot, right? So like Google had similar technology to ChatGPT, but they didn't release it, and OpenAI released theirs first, and they're now the leader, right? So there's this race going on, and instead of asking companies, now slow down and let your competition get ahead of you, I think you need legislation to say, like, there has to be some standards around what's safe and when is it good enough that we can release it on the public, right? And, I gave the example of Sydney. I think that's a great example of a company that rushed and put something out that wasn't ready. And, we don't want those kind of reckless releases as the software gets more and more powerful.
Yeah, so definitely a role for regulation.
Do we have any idea what that kind of regulation might look like?
I mean, I have a few thoughts. I mean, I would say, I welcome anyone else to chime in. I think one is, we certainly don't want to try to have Congress write laws around fast-moving technology and constantly saying, here's the thing that needs to be done exactly. So, instead, I think having some broad principles, having a regulator that relies on external expertise, would be a good starting point. I think, one of the things is a lot of the danger here in my mind comes from the emergence of new capabilities as companies are pushing the boundaries. As Steve was talking about, this rapid expansion in the capability that's being used to train these models. So, you can have limits and say that when people have created something more powerful than what's come before, there needs to be third-party review to assess, what are the risks before it's released, right? And that kind of a rule, would still allow progress, but would require some process of letting third parties look and determine the risks before things get released on the public. I mean, so I think those kind of rules would still let us benefit, but would, mitigate a lot of the danger here.
And I think transparency. So we're seeing some of this today, the companies themselves that are releasing these models, I think, trying to strike some, tone of transparency and with it and thinking about governance, ethical guidance on what they are developing and how that's working. But I do think, that there's a role here for. I like the way you're describing it. You can't focus on like the specific things because it's going to change so quickly. But there do need to be, I think, some broad stroke guidance, expectations, ethical requirements here.
I think some area or countries are like the European Union, come up with, maybe they're ahead of the US in terms of the digital privacy or the protections. They might provide some reference for us. That would be useful. It's no known solutions we just follow. I mean, but there are examples, reference, and practice. But as long as we stick with our the core value of our society, and we build up and self-correction, alignment. I mean, this constant feedback and bottom-up and top-down combined. So these are the mechanisms actually existing as of today.
And the EU does have a draft AI Act that's close to becoming law, although that's then going to take a few years to really fully get implemented, but still, I think you're right, Steve, that that's going to be a big shift in the regulatory landscape for AI.
Yeah, we'll see that.
Steve, you were talking about the interaction between the human and the model in terms of solving the math program. To what degree will we be just turning decisions over to AI, and to what degree will we need that kind of human interaction?
This is really the case by case and up to the individual. It's like, I remember there's a joke why Americans are so innovative, because the answer is American people are lazy people. We just want to invent machines and to help them. So, but we are not lazy. I think the reason we are lazy is that we need help from technology, from machines, but we can shift our focus to something else. That means we might find something more challenging or offering us more opportunities, and we just want to utilize the technologies, what technology can provide us to automate some process or help of some aspect. So the boundary to cut between what machine can take care of you and your own responsibility is up to each individual, depending on their needs, their interest, where their focus. And I just want to iterate that I believe machine is really to free us, basically free us from slavery or more routine work, so that we can shift to the next level. That is, I think that's probably true for everybody and for our society as a whole. I know this, for example, the tools of ChatGPT provide to do the coding, like syntax checks is very helpful. And I would not hesitate to just go ahead to use it because it frees you to focus on the coding itself instead of some routine work. And if that happens, say, hey, I certainly cannot remember some basic syntax because the machine is taking care of me. And that's, I can't imagine, I'm a software engineer. How can that happen? I develop too much dependence on that. I would say that's okay. So it just happened. It's not starting from the large language model. I think we are relying on internet to communicate. It's already happened 20 years ago. So technology is changing our life, and that's the trend.
It makes me think about my 9-year-old who doesn't understand why he has to do spelling tests because spell check does it all for him. So, syntax, it's okay if you don't remember it, Steve.
That sounds like
machine's got you covered.
That's like my 21-year-old.
I agree. We have to trust this AI system because we are let them take care of some significant part of our work and life. So we have to make sure they're good.
So I have a large stack of questions that have come in from the audience.
Me too.
I think we might move to the Q&A section now. That's, so I'm going to start with a question. Why has it taken so long to develop self-driving cars? Anyone?
Let me try to answer this question. We haven't seen the level 4 or level 5 autonomous driving now. I remember like 3 years ago, an article from MIT saying, the professor says it's never going to happen because it's a long tail problem. It takes forever. It's very difficult. But now, actually, I drive a Tesla with FSD subscribed, and I constantly test the latest upgrade, the software release. My feeling is I rely more and more on FSD. I don't know, because it's just convenient. It's not level 4 yet, but that's a convenience the FSD provides that first I feel safer to use FSD than I drive myself. I think this is important. Second, the convenience is coming from the driving is basically following the driving rules, and it's very routine. And if the AI is capable of taking care of that, especially highway driving or some local drivings, then why not? Because people are lazy, right? We're trying to be lazy. So I think it's a percentage of the time I spend using FSD versus my manual driving is really changing. In the past 24 months, 12 months, past 6 months, I feel that. So I believe the autonomous driving is becoming a reality from my own experience.
I'll just add on that regulation is part of why it's taken so long. I think technology has been in development for a long time now, but maybe it hasn't been safe enough, and it hasn't met that threshold of okay, we can all be safe and have confidence that we're safe with that. So I think just going back to some of this earlier conversation about the need for regulation, but also acknowledging that with regulation, there come delays, and it's going to take longer, and it takes a long time. So why has it taken so long? Well, that's a piece of it. So we want to make sure that we're all safe when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add briefly, the bar on what we expect for an autonomous vehicle, it has to be about 10 times safer than a human driver for us to accept it.
Yeah.
And you can notice that because anytime there's an accident with an autonomous vehicle, it's global news. But of course, anytime there's an accident with a human driver, well, we know that happens, right? But it also is, as Steve was saying with the long tail, there's a lot of knowing about the world that's required to drive, right? All kinds of weird things happen on a road, things you wouldn't expect, obstacles, weird circumstances. For it to be acceptable, you can't just run through something you didn't see or stop every time there's a fog or some weird weather pattern, right? There's a lot that goes into getting to the level of reliability that we demand. And so I think, to me, that's, both of those are right, but I think those factors together mean it took a long time. And maybe the people who were promoting it were being a little optimistic in their early projections of how quickly it would come.
Okay, a different question. How is AI going to impact the job market?
Gosh, these are such easy questions, y'all. I don't know. I think in some ways we'll be freed up to do more, right? To stand on the tools that we have and be more productive, be more efficient, be able to do other than what we're doing today, because it'll make that possible. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think about like jobs that were on my radar of, we were just talking about autonomous vehicles, and I have a relative that is a truck driver, and truck driving is one of those careers that they've said, oh, this is going to be totally disrupted with autonomous vehicles. And so there were some careers that were already like on your mind as, okay, this industry is going to be disrupted with technology and it's coming. And now it's like, well, software engineers, are they all going to lose their jobs? Because, now you can write code. I mean, I've always thought, gosh, I should have minored in CS, or I should have like done computer science or something when I was, I was an international studies and French double major. That just has happened to have a knack working with software engineers, go figure. But yeah, like, no, I don't think so. Like, I think to your point, like, it's just going to help you be able to free up some of that headspace to think about other things and let the machine handle for you what you previously had to do. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I think historically, let's see, the U.S. outsourcing the manufacturing, right? Not much manufacturing in the U.S. right now. I guess the trend will continue. If machine can take care of the routine job, it's actually, in terms of total number of available jobs, I think, it'll go up instead of going down, because new type of jobs will be created. I think the humans, like, for example, the service, there's the potential to release more service if individuals are freed up. The release of more service requires more jobs to be created that don't exist before. And so, like, the US has a pretty low unemployment rate in like the past 50, 60 years. And even all the manufacturing jobs are outsourced offshore, and that's an indication that we might lose some existing jobs, but more jobs can be created that we don't know as of today. And that's, I mean, if you look at historical data, that's, if the trend continues, it will be like that.
So this is a sort of related question. What should current white-collar workers in Silicon Valley do to increase their employability in the future?
I mean, I think it's definitely important to learn how to use AI in your job to take advantage of it. I mean, I guess it's Scott Galloway who says that people who use AI will definitely replace people who don't use AI in the workforce. So that's a safe bet, and that's a good thing to to be obviously keeping up. And I think that developing, like, more than ever, your ability as a white-collar professional to create value through your relationships and through how you work with other people is really important, right? That what's commoditizing most quickly is sort of narrow individual tasks, right? So that are, that AI has also been shown to be something of a leveler, that it's making people who are less good catch up to the more talented people on individual tasks. So I think those would be things I'd say.
Okay, let's move on to a new question. How do we address criminal activity enhanced by generative AI? For instance, deepfake videos, copyright issues, stealing content and repurposing it.
I mean, it's a good question, right? The deepfakes, it's a good example of people try to use AI to catch deepfakes, but it's been an arms race where the bad actors have had the upper hand. They seem to be able to pretty easily stay ahead of detection schemes, right? So, people talk about alternatives like, instead of relying on AI technology to catch bad uses of AI, rely on proof, right? So there's consortia to say, hey, we'll have watermarking and proof of the origin of content. So you can say, hey, this came from this camera that was published by this photographer at this organization took it. So you can have proof that there wasn't tampered, it wasn't generated, or a synthetic image, right? So things like that, I think, are probably more promising. But generally, any area where there's this asymmetry where the technology can enable bad actors to do things like breaking into systems, right? Like it's probably advantage for hackers to use AI to break into systems, right? So we have to be really careful about unleashing tools like that onto the broad public, right? That's one of the reasons that we need some regulation, in my mind, rather than let's turn it loose and hopefully it will enable law enforcement and good actors to keep up.
It just sparked for me thinking about, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think one of the challenges for a lot of the good actors, and I speak for some of the nonprofit space that I see, is that kind of to your point, like they're, well, I don't know, this wasn't your point. Your point was that the bad actors are maybe are ahead, but the nonprofits, like, they're under-resourced, and I mean, a lot of them are lacking IT departments as it is, and so some of the good actors of like, well, what could we do with this technology, or how might we use it in good, positive ways? They're not, resourced to be able to think about it that way or as much. So I guess one of the concerns I do have is around, what we've sometimes called the digital divide, or this gap that has kind of, happened between those who do have access to technology and those who don't, becomes even wider as, some of the good actors that I see, some of the nonprofits that are making such important impact in our communities just aren't even able. I was at a conference this summer on child welfare, and I mean, everything I've been surrounded by in my day-to-day, AI has been such a part of it, and that conversation was noticeably absent from this conference on child welfare. Nobody was talking about AI. Nobody was talking about the implications of how that might improve things or what challenges it might bring. And so to me, that was what was noticeable, was that it wasn't being talked about there at all. And these are amazing organizations helping children in the foster care system across our country. And like, gosh, what an interesting intersection to think about the good that could be done with the technology here, but it was an absent conversation there. So, yeah.
Can you talk about the singularity?
Well, the singularity is an idea that you're going to get this exponential increase in technological development. For example, that AI will start to recursively self-improve, and you'll reach a point of such rapid improvement that it's completely unpredictable how things will evolve from there. Popularized by Ray Kurzweil, who...
I knew that much. I knew Ray Kurzweil.
has been talking about it for decades. He's been projecting out exponential trends for a long time. I think I think that a lot of projections around these kinds of exponential self-improvement scenarios ignore a lot of the friction that comes about, right? Like, it already takes months to train large models, and lots of science requires you to go out and do real experiments in the real world that takes time and physical activity. So I think, it ignores some of the things that are required beyond pure brain power, pure intelligence. So I guess I think that kind of fast takeoff, I'm more skeptical of that. But I do think that we're still seeing a situation where AI is going to somewhat speed. Oh, the other thing that I think is friction is I think as we try to tackle harder and harder scientific problems, the problems are getting harder, right? Like, it's getting exponentially harder to make breakthroughs. So it's not at all clear that even though you have more capable resources doing science, that you're going to have this rapid increase in scientific output. In fact, we already have an exponential increase in scientific resources that are put into the world as the economy grows and more scientists work and more companies pour resources into R&D, and yet we're not seeing an exponential explosion of output there. So I guess I'll leave it at that, although I do think it's reasonable to assume that AI is going to continue to get much more capable over the coming years. I just don't think it's going to be an exponential takeoff like the singularity hypothesis.
Yeah, I think people follow the gradients of the technology. The gradient is not like a step function of sudden change. The gradient means there are it's a visible process that we monitor, we pay attention, like very powerful model called trained, and who are capable of doing that. I mean, there are regulations, so I think anything happen like the singularity is probably exaggerated. In terms of reality, it's a smooth transition with gradient to getting there. So the second question is AI one entity, or AI world is also diverse with many entities? Say, for human society, we have different continents, we have different countries, states, different cultures. We are balanced, right? This world is like balanced. And for the AI, is this as diverse as our humans, that basically different entities of AIs, they might balanced coexist with us so that such unbalanced singularity will never happen? I mean, that's how possible is that if we maintain a gradient, maintain a balance moving forward. And so we can push the technology innovations. Meanwhile, we can basically, we can say, hey, singularity is always away, don't need to worry about it now. So at least for now, I'm not worrying about it.
10 years isn't that long.
And after 10 years, hopefully it's another 10 years, and another 10 years. And so hopefully...
It's as close as self-driving cars?
Yeah, self-driving cars getting there. But it's the question for our individuals is that we want to coexist with powerful AIs. I mean, to build a interactive system to enhance our own intellectual levels, and we definitely don't want to curb that how powerful technology can be in the future. We just want to full speed ahead to advance that. So yeah, maybe that's a question actually still 10 years away. I mean, I know 10 years is short.
And we better be thinking about it now.
I agree. I think all the systems are basically, we have to approach from the whole system perspective, that even individuals have different perspective. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question that sounds just like one for Steve. Is the silicon chip technology too slow for dynamic AI?
I think we know there's a Moore's law to push the silicon, the density of the transistors integrated on the chip. And now, because the AI generates a huge demand for computing power, there are other technology from packaging from system integration, from interconnect that actually keep the scaling actually even faster than Moore's law. So I think we are not running out of the method to maintain the exponential growth of the hardware to cope with AI compute demand. I used 1,000 times increase of computing power over 10 years. It will keep that way at least in the next 10 years.
Okay, when people ask the same question to ChatGPT or some other engine at the same time, does it generate the same response for everyone? Or does it rephrase the same response for everyone?
No. There's a certain amount of randomness, I believe. There's a way of generating responses where there's some randomness. Like it has that, remember that table of probabilities of what's the right next word? It'll pick among the more likely ones. So like when you say regenerate the response, it's generating a new response. So in that way, it's not exactly the same answer each time. As best we can tell from our tests, even if you tell it to turn that off and just pick the most likely thing, I think they're still running a bunch of A/B tests because it still doesn't return the same result. It's not deterministic. It does generate different responses, and I think pretty much any consumer service these days does a certain amount of A/B testing, and so you may well be getting a different experience than other people, even on or more traditional digital experiences.
Yeah, especially when the AI remember what you have. It will be individual. It will be different, and so the prompt is injecting your patient history to ChatGPT, and it's different from different users, so the answers will be different.
Okay. How do you form ethics of AI? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. 10 Commandments for AI.
Well, it's a big area of study, this idea of getting AI to understand and follow ethics. I mean, on one side, there have been studies literally on how much do AI systems understand ethical principles. And as they've been getting more capable, the AI systems are actually better at deriving and understanding ethical principles. They've read and absorbed a lot of human writing, and so they can do better and better ethical reasoning. But it doesn't necessarily mean they always follow it. And sort of that's probably I think it'll be easier to get AI systems that can tell you the ethics than can walk the walk, a little bit like us human beings.
We see some applications like a coding copilot and the like. Do we think we might see a Christian companion AI to help us through the faithful journey?
I like that idea. I mean, I think kind of, again, to this point that, sometimes the communities that are outside of the tech scene aren't thinking about this yet, and it makes me curious, like, what would that look like? Ooh, who is thinking about that? What an interesting idea. What might that, so, yeah, I hope that there will be communities of faith that are engaging with generative AI and thinking about how it can inform our practices and our care for creation, our care for each other, our care for our communities, because we need that. I think we need people who care, engaging with new technology for the good of our planet and for the good of our communities and the good of each other. So I like the question. I think it's a good one, and I hope the answer is yes.
How do you envision using AI in military, sports, gambling, and household uses?
I want to meet the person who asked this question. Come find me at the Mix and Mingle after this.
Yeah, I think AI will penetrate all these areas.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, if for example, the military is like armed races, if you don't do it, your opponent, basically, like the atomic bomb, the first atomic bomb in the US is 1945, and look at it within like a couple of years, how many countries are developing similar capabilities. So then back to like household, yeah, I mean, why not? The intellectual robots, they are powerful enough to function as a supercomputer to handle the general intelligence to understand your need to be taken care of you. I mean, why not? There are already started companies developing that household robots.
So one idea on that one, right? Like, create a meal plan for my family for the week that is gluten-free, create all the ingredients needed, the list of ingredients, and order them from the grocery store for me to be delivered at this time on this day. Right? Like, do it for me. Like, I'm into that. I hadn't thought about it, but now I think I should try it. Like,
It works pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't done the ordering, but the rest of it. But I would say on the military side, there's a couple of things that I think are sort of at a pivotal moment, right? We've been able to decide not to build or deploy certain kinds of weapons, and one is lethal autonomous weapons, right? So, for example, drones that would autonomously kill people, right? And we're sort of on the cusp of, will we actually have that become a mainstream technology? Needless to say, the danger of proliferation and terrorists getting access to that kind of technology is very high. It could be very bad, but there's rapid progress in this area, so we don't have long before it becomes a fait accompli. And then the other one that I think we should be worried about is increasingly turning over decisions over our nuclear arsenals to AI, which again is a slippery slope, and there's a lot of tendency to automate more and more until eventually you don't have effective human in the loop. So these are two areas that I think we really have to take seriously and say, we don't want to have a future where AI is doing either of those two things.
How can we have confidence in the results that we receive from our queries? Computations may be fine, but what about many others? Some computations may be fine. Do we have a way to tell?
We should have our own way to verify. That is needed because no matter how helpful this AI can help you, there should be an independent thinking, critical thinking from each individual to verify. That's like the suggestion I would think. Otherwise, even the most reliable system can have errors, sometimes out of control. And I think it's just like mimicking the human actions. Even you trust somebody, you still have some reasoning, some own critical thinking to verify the information and the decisions. So I think that's a good practice. If there are diverse AI systems, you might rely on a different AI to verify the one you are using, for example. So yeah, I think there are a lot of verifications going on. Like, for example, the lawmakers of the US tend to make decisions slowly, move slowly. That's not, I think that's intended because of there are a lot of interactions for verification to verify the decision. So that's just part of the mechanism that we have to keep in mind when we are start working with more and more AIs.
Do AI systems understand what they say? If not, will they ever?
I think the answer to the first one is, almost certainly no today, but I can only say almost certainly because we really have such a poorly defined understanding of intelligence, let alone consciousness, that it's really hard to say, how would we know if an AI is conscious and what it knows? I mean, you may have heard last year, there was an engineer at Google who got fired for being convinced that their internal ChatGPT-like system was conscious. And he was trying to get a lawyer to fight for its freedom. And people said, well, that's pretty ridiculous. But it's like, as these AI systems get more and more powerful, how would we know if they know? Like, we don't have the only way we know that a person is conscious, well, you're like me, and you speak reasonably, so I assume you're conscious. But, that's a pretty weak analogy, right? We don't know how to determine if an animal is conscious, let alone if a computer is.
What do you think about the near-term applications of AI to diagnostic medical image analysis, including radiology and retinal imaging?
Regulations? Is this related to the regulations? I think technology definitely is looking into that. There are dedicated deep learning models dedicated to read the images, and they have the good data to train the model. There are publications actually showing the promising results. But is there any hospital or deployments? I think it's something to do with regulations. Is it?
There's some, like the FDA is actually approving some AI devices, and they're following kind of a similar regulatory approach to other technologies, right? So they actually have started to greenlight use of AI technologies. There's some examples of that now that are deployed. And then there's other examples where research hospitals can use technology before it's generally approved. And so you've seen other examples of AI systems that have been tested in a clinical setting at research hospitals.
This is a little bit tangential, but I think it is interesting, when you think about rural areas that don't have enough nurses and doctors, when you think about, other countries around the world that don't have the medical care that would be helpful for the people there to have access to, just looking back at telemedicine and how useful that has been, and then what is generative AI going to mean and unlock and allow for communities that, wouldn't have human doctors or nurses available. And I think there could be a positive side to that, for sure.
How does AI matter to religion?
I like this question. I think it's an interesting one. I don't have a thoughtful answer at the moment. I feel like this is one we should start a discussion series on, Claire, maybe, going forward. I've seen some people talking about, with generative AI, looking at AI as a religion, and I think that's a fascinating statement. Well, what does that mean? What purpose is it serving for people in that way? And how, do you worship it? That is an interesting concept. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to this. I think it's an interesting question. appropriate that we're, for the forum in which we're holding this discussion, but maybe others have a thought. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Julie Nelson. I'm the assisting priest here at Christ Church. Large language models know what the internet has taught them. And the internet says a lot of things about religion and a lot of things about God, some of which is really good theology and some of which is really bad theology. And bad theology is really dangerous because bad theology kills people. And so I think for religion, the challenge that I have is that when I put in a prompt to ChatGPT about a theological question, sometimes I get really good theology and sometimes I get really bad theology. And this week, actually, there's a meme going around that someone put into an AI model to give a picture of Jesus flipping over tables in the temple. And it is a picture of Jesus flipping his body over a table. So the models only know how they can interpret language. And we as humans do a terrible job of interpreting Scripture. And I can't imagine that the models are going to do better. So that's my perspective.
So I think we're going to stop at this point. Thank you very much, Ron, Corey, and Steve. We did not make it through the entire set of questions, but if you come to the reception afterwards, you might have a chance to ask in person if your question wasn't answered so far. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.